Hello there, welcome back to Jennie Designs with Paper, and thank you so much for stopping by my channel again. I have a card video for you today, so get comfy and let's get crafty. I am working with another one of the stamp sets I picked up at Joann's last week. This is a Pinkfresh Studio Hero Arts collaborative set, and it is called You Make a Difference. That's the name of the stamp set, and it has a floral frame with a center cutout, and the cutout in the center is the perfect size for all of the sentiments in the stamp set. So I have the stamp on my Misty lid, and I have originally I had a smaller piece, but I decided I better go bigger to make this work properly. I have half of a sheet of Nina Classic Crest Solar White 80-pound cardstock, and I am preparing this cardstock with my Rabbit Hole Designs anti-static powder tool. Got that one out. I am doing that because I have handled this paper and there are naturally occurring oils and lotions and stuff on my fingers, and I want the embossing powder to stick to my ink, not to the oils or something left back on the paper by my hands. And also static electricity. If you live in a very dry climate, static electricity can really mess up your embossing. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close the lid on my Misty. I have just a microfiber rag that I use in my craft room to slide my hand over the door of this Misty, the lid. I want to make sure that I get a nice, smooth stamp surface. And then I'm going to reposition my paper down in the bottom left-hand corner of my Misty again, and I'm going to stamp it a second time. I am stamping it twice for two reasons. The first reason is, like I said, my Versamark ink is a little bit on the dry side. But secondly, the manufacturing process sometimes leaves residue on clear stamps. And so the first time you stamp it, it's not ever going to be great. It doesn't matter how detailed or solid the stamp is. The first time you stamp a brand new stamp, it's not going to be great. And Versamark is just one of those ways that you can kind of prepare or clean off that processing leftover gunk. So the embossing powder I'm using is the Simon Says Stamp Rose Gold. This is one of my favorite colored embossing powders. It is a great embossing powder for sentiments and fine details. And it's just such a pretty color, especially when it's all heat set and shiny. I did notice that the bottom of my image did not stamp very well. And I was very tempted to stick it back in my Misty and stamp over that embossing powder, which you totally can do, and add some more embossing powder to it. But I decided not to do that. I was worried that I just don't want to jack it up. I can trim this down and make it smaller than a card front and get rid of that part that didn't stamp very well. Okay, so now that I have this all heat set and the embossing powder has been melted and it's shiny and pretty, I wanted to zhuzh it up just a little bit. I wanted to add a little bit of pizzazz to this really beautiful stamp set. I didn't want to use Copic markers. I have heard that Copic markers and embossing powder do not mix well, like the embossing powder can ruin the nibs on your markers. I've never tried it, and I've heard some people say, heck yeah, it totally ate my marker nib, and then I've heard other people have never had a problem. So I just figured I have 100 other kinds of mediums. There's not a ton of open space to do a lot of blending, so a water medium is obviously going to be the next best option. However, I did not use watercolor paper. But in my stash of mediums, I have these Derwent Inktense pencils. So these are a watercolor medium or a water medium, but they're not a traditional a traditional pencil. So they are a pencil delivered ink, if that makes sense at all. Once you have colored, and you don't need a ton of pigment either. Like you could probably tell I was not filling in all of those petals. I was just putting just a little tiny touch of the color in each area. And then I'm activating that pigment with a water brush. This is just a small amount of water, just enough to activate that pigment. And you end up with this really vibrant, bright color. Because I'm not using watercolor paper, this is the perfect medium because you need just a tiny amount of color to really get some pigment on there. The next perfect thing about these pencils is that once you have activated all of the pigment and it has dried, it is a permanent medium. I love these in mixed media and art journaling because you're very often adding layers, and sometimes those layers are wet and you don't have to worry about your color smearing out. Also, you can take your water brush like I did with that orange there and go tip to tip, and it doesn't harm it at all. So perfect medium to color this card with. Like I said, I'm going to need to trim this down. It is the card size. It is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. But because that bottom did not stamp very well, I'm going to trim it down. So I have pulled out my waffle flower A2 layers dies, and I'm going to put the top edge of that right against the inside of this die. And I used the second die out of this die set. So it's about, let me get my card and my ruler. I think it's 4 by 5 1/4 inches, this particular die. Yeah, so it's 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. So it's making just a single layer on my card front. I'm going to tape that die in place with some, I've got some blue painter's tape and a little piece of that yellow tape that I bought from Spellbinders to use with my glimmer machine. And voila, there we have our card front. So the next thing I'm going to do is add a sentiment from the stamp set into the center of this card front. And I went with the "So Proud of You." I have a number of nieces and nephews that graduated this last spring, and I'm still a little behind on the whole graduation card thing. So I figured if I used a sentiment in it that was kind of encouraging and uplifting, I could use this for one of my nieces and nephews that have graduated. So eventually I'll get caught up. The thing with this that I forgot about when I was putting my card front back in my Misty is that they're designed to be landscape, not portrait style cards. You could use it either way, but the sentiments fit into this frame in a landscape style. So if you didn't want to use one of these sentiments, you could totally use it as a portrait style card. Anyway, I am going to ink that up with my Versamark ink, and I'm going to use my thumb to put just the right amount of pressure. I don't want to push it down too hard because I don't want the letters to blur out. So I'm just kind of pushing on the lid right there. And I did stamp it twice. I did edit one of those out because you don't need to see that again, right? Same reason, didn't want there to be any smudging because of the manufacturing process, the residue left over. And because I was a little bit nervous because I didn't do a very good job with my anti-static powder tool this time around, and I was worried that it was not going to, there was going to be a lot of leftover embossing powder, but it's so pretty, and I love how shiny it is. You can catch that in the light right there. So my next step is I've pulled out a piece of purple cardstock. It's kind of the same color purple as the purple flowers I colored, the little kind of pod flowers. Don't know what color it is. It's just purple. I have cut this down to be 4 1/4 by 8 1/2. I'm making a landscape style card. My camera's wigging out again because there we go. It is 5 1/2 inches wide by 4 1/4 inches, and I'm going to score it in the middle at it is 4 1/2 inches wide by 8 1/2 inches, and I'm going to score it in the half at 4 1/4. There we go. I don't make these landscape style cards very often, so the measurements always wig out in my brain. Okay, so now we have a top folding landscape style card, and I am just going to use my tape runner, my ATG gun, and I'm going to use a lot of tape really close to the edge because the heat from heat embossing does warp the paper just a little bit. Nothing that, a little bit of adhesive can't fix, but it's definitely not the card to skimp on the adhesive with. Often when I've heat embossed, I used 3M foam tape to tape it down, but I just went with a flat card this time. And then I'm going to add the inside, and this card is finished. So I have a piece of copy paper that is cut down to 4 inches by 5 1/4. And I use this copy paper on the inside of my card bases that are not white so that I have something to write my note on, my little message inside the card. And it gives it just a nice finished look. So here's my card. I am a huge fan of Pinkfresh Studios. I think that their stamp sets are just gorgeous. And I love how this card turned out. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave me a comment. Give me a thumbs up. And thanks for stopping by today. I hope you enjoyed this video. I have added a couple of other videos here I think you would like, as well as a subscribe button. If you have not already subscribed to my channel, I would love it if you did so. Thank you so much for stopping by, and I hope you have a really great day.